everybody doing? I'm so excited to be back live with Dominic D'Agostino and Angela Poff. Welcome to the Metabolic Health Summit Facebook page. Thank you guys so much for following along. This is a educational platform, this Facebook page, because our 4-day event is not until January 2019. There Dominic is right now. We're going to invite him in, but our event is not until 2019. But this really is going to become an educational platform over the course of the 8 months prior to our event. Let's invite Dom in here real quick. Click on him, add. Right. So Dr. Dominic D'Agostino and Dr. Angela Poff are going to be joining us. Very, very excited. They are in the lab at the University of South Florida. They're top scientists in the ketogenic space, looking into metabolic therapy and its application in disease, as well as a variety of other factors, and even under environmental extremes. These guys, it says they're adding, so bear with us as we just for them to join. There they are. Hey. Hi guys. Hi. How's it going in the lab today?
Good. We are too far apart though, I think. Hold on. We're gonna have
Uh-oh, you guys gotta look like you like each other. There we go. It looks like there's some very important things on the whiteboard behind you. Yes.
We got medical school notes in addition to some things they don't teach in medical school, but they should. So we're adding to some things to their notes there.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. So I was just telling everybody how you guys are some of the top scientists in the world for ketogenic metabolic therapies. And I've really not introduced who I am. I guess we kind of briefly talked about it in the live last session, but so we all really sort of balance each other out. These guys are in the trenches, pushing the research forward. They're in the lab day in, day out. And I've really dealt with the implementation side of things. So alongside Epigenetic's foundation, we've had up some pilot studies in both humans and in canines that involve the ketogenic diet and its application in disease management. So I've worked with over 100 cancer patients, as well as over 500 canines with this metabolic approach. And it's been pretty incredible to watch. But I will say, we are not medical doctors. We are also not dietitians. So if you take some of what we're talking about today, just use your best judgment and also talk to your physician about it. Let's really start a conversation about this. This is what our real goal is to bring a conversation around it, talk about the preclinical and clinical studies, as well as some really impactful case studies along the way, and really move this movement forward. So excited to get into it today. Real quick before we do, make sure you guys check out a link that our friend and MHS speaker, Andrew Kutnick, is going to be posting. He also had a great TEDx talk. If you guys haven't checked it out, we'll be posting that soon. He just posted the link to our newsletter giveaway. So if you guys sign up on our website at that link right there, you're entered to win 2 tickets to Metabolic Health Summit, which is over $800 in terms of value. We are going to be answering questions at the end, but let's get into it. Today, we're really talking about, can keto affect DNA, which sounds like a crazy idea, but it's got some really great potential evidence behind it. So Dom, do you want to take it from here? And maybe first explain a little bit about what keto is and how ketones might be more than just an energy source.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, we know that ketone bodies are energy metabolites. We've known that for almost a century now. And more importantly, right around the 1960s, we understood and appreciated ketones as enhancing and preserving brain energy metabolism in the face of starvation. That they can largely replace glucose as the primary source of energy for your brain in the absence of glucose deprivation or limited food availability. So with that in mind, there has been a lot of work on the metabolic effects of ketones as it pertains to the function of the heart, to different cells, in particular neurons. And the field has mostly been focused on ketones as energy metabolites. But over the last 2013, so over the last 5 years, the I would say prolific scientists that are really publishing and researching this area are studying ketones as signaling metabolites that can impact inflammation and actually, impact various inflammatory pathways that can suppress inflammation. And more importantly, what we're going to talk about today is the effects of ketones on genes, in particular, what we call the epigenome. So when we are a bunch of cells in kind of the womb, we are undifferentiated, but our eye cell has the same DNA as our skin cell, has the same DNA as our muscle cell. And that after they differentiate, that is kind of written in stone, I would say, right? And that's hard to change. It's hard to de-differentiate. But the epigenome is something that can be influenced by exercise, by lifestyle, and by diet, and various metabolites that are altered in our diet and can be elevated to very high levels, like the ketone body beta hydroxybutyrate. And that can literally change the epigenome in ways by altering the expression of different genes, by functioning as a class of drug, more or less. It's an endogenous metabolite that has the function of what we call a histone deacetylase inhibitor. So
say that 5 times fast.
It can be kind of complicated, and I won't go into it, but when you inhibit an inhibitor of DNA expression, essentially what it does is it's opening up something called the chromatin to allow for the expression of certain genes in our body that would otherwise be silenced or wouldn't be turned on. And the implications are, for longevity, for suppression of, if it's a tumor suppressor, and that's inhibited, the expression of that, then activating that can suppress the formation of tumors. There are neuroprotective effects. There are many rare genetic diseases out there. One of them is Kabuki Syndrome, where there's an imbalance of this gene expression being turned off and on. And the ketone bodies tend to circumvent that gene dysregulation and can turn on a gene and actually silence some of the mutations, at least in animal models. So we're interested in kind of studying it from that angle. So today we're gonna talk about ketones specifically. Not as an energy metabolite. That's another conversation that we could possibly do, but as epigenetic regulators of our DNA.
Which is really, really interesting on many levels. I know we have some people here that are interested on, keto for overall health, but really to talk about how ketones themselves, possibly from, nutritional ketosis, or just even the choices that we make, how they impact our genes or have a potential to impact gene expression is fascinating and really needs a bigger conversation around it. So Angela, talk a little bit more about, I guess, one way ketones are in terms of ketone signaling, which is to affect gene expression. Talk a little bit more about how ketones signal that and sort of make that all sort of happen.
Sure. It's a really, really fascinating process. And it's kind of complicated, but I think we can really, understand it when we think about, you and I started literally as a single cell, and Dom was talking about this just a second ago. So we developed from a single cell. We have one set of DNA, and our entire DNA, if we were to stretch out a piece of DNA that is wound up in one cell, it's actually like 6 feet long, which is really incredible. And that DNA we can basically consider to be like the blueprint for building our cells. So the DNA reads as like a blueprint for a house, and depending on what you want to build at that moment, you want to build a bathroom, do you want to build, a garage, you go open up that part of the blueprint and you read the instructions, and then you can build that area. So our DNA is exactly like that, and our genes are those kind of chapters in that book. So we go, say we want to build a neuron. This particular genes that tell us neuron specific information, we need to be able to go in that really long molecule of DNA, remember 6 feet long, that packs into a tiny cell that's microscopic. We need to be able to find that information so that we can then make the proteins, and that's what DNA does. It tells us how to make proteins, and then the proteins function and make the neuron work. So essentially, it becomes extremely important to have a really good way to locate different genes within the DNA and open them up or close them depending on what you're wanting to do. And so that's the system that we're talking about today that's being affected by ketosis and by ketones directly. So our very long DNA is actually wound up around these proteins called histones. And they're just these proteins that basically you have the long DNA that winds around them. And say that you want to, you know, go open up some genes that are related to like neuron function. You would have to find where that gene is and unwind the DNA there. And then you're able to read that part of the DNA. And so then you can make those proteins, and that can then function as a neuron, right? So this whole system of what Dom was saying, acetylation and deacetylation, is a way to do that. So there's the system where if you add this compound called acetyl groups, basically, to the DNA or to the histones that the DNA wraps around, it opens up areas of the genome. And then we have other molecules that go and remove those acetyl groups, and that would close down those areas as well. So what we see is that in health and disease even, there are alterations in this normal process, such that genes that maybe are supposed to be acetylated and therefore open and able to be read are actually closed down when they should be open, and vice versa. And so it's really interesting that beta hydroxybutyrate, the primary ketone molecule, actually functions in a way to directly impact this system, and it will inhibit the deacetylation of our DNA, which means it will open up the expression of certain genes. And some of those genes seem to have really important effects in our health and disease, such as genes that encode for antioxidant protection against oxidative stress and other insults to our tissues.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And especially so because there is some relevance there to disease and how it might actually impact people maybe on this very live broadcast. So maybe take an even deeper dive, if you guys will, into the relevance of this in disease and what this might mean as we continue to explore the potential of nutritional ketosis and or ketones and their impact on gene expression.
Sure. Well, I'll first talk about one potential way that this is affected. So in cancer, we see that it's very consistent that you have abnormal patterns of this acetylation and deacetylation. So we often see that there are overactivities of these proteins called histone deacetylases. And basically, that means that certain genes that should be expressed and active are actually silenced. And it's not surprising that most of these genes are genes that protect us against cancer. So for example, and we call those tumor suppressor genes. So tumor suppressor genes are any gene that its activity, or the protein that encodes its activity, would do something that prevents us from getting cancer. So a good example is called P53. P53 is like the major tumor suppressor. It has a nickname called Guardian of the Genome, which I think is a pretty cool nickname for a protein. And it literally functions to, when our DNA gets mutated or damaged, it will activate processes that go in and repair or reverse that damage. It will tell a cell that is abnormally dividing rapidly to stop doing that. Of course, that makes sense if cancer is trying to divide and grow rapidly. P53 acts to stop it. So P53 in many cancers is abnormally deacetylated, and that means that it can't be expressed. The DNA that encodes that gene is wound up too tightly around histone proteins. And so histone deacetylase inhibitors are being developed. This is a class of anti-cancer drugs. They're being developed specifically to go in and open up areas of the DNA that are being abnormally silenced in cancer. And what's cool is that research is now showing that beta hydroxybutyrate has the same function as this class of anti-cancer drugs. So it's really neat because, you know, the research into the ketogenic diet as a potential therapy for cancer has suggested that it might, in animal models at least, be able to change the way that the genes are being expressed. So Dr. Adrian Scheck, who's going to be a speaker at Metabolic Health Summit, has shown that if you give mice that have brain cancer, when you give them a ketogenic diet, that tumor, the gene expression of the tumor changes. And it changes in a way that it now looks more like healthy tissue. And it's possible, no one's quite studying this yet, or they might be studying it, but it's not been published yet. It's possible that it might be explained by this process, that beta hydroxybutyrate itself functions as an HDAC inhibitor and can alter gene expression. So, you know, that's just one example of why people are out there studying ketosis as a potential therapy for cancer, among many other diseases.
And it's a drug that's under intense investigation by the major pharmaceutical companies that are trying to mimic the effects of beta hydroxybutyrate, in particular on the anti-cancer effect. I've given talks at, I won't mention them here, but the major pharmaceutical companies that are looking at the anti-inflammatory effects of that, and with that, maybe another Facebook Live that we could do. They're looking to, you know, determine if small molecules can be created that can mimic the effects of this endogenous metabolite that our bodies make naturally through fasting and through the ketogenic diet. And then also now, more recently, we can deliver beta hydroxybutyrate with exogenous supplements. You know, that could be something as simple as medium chain triglyceride oil or powder, or beta hydroxybutyrate electrolyte salts, or the ketone esters, which are probably the most powerful exogenous ketones on the market. So that it's interesting that you have a very an area of science where pharmaceutical companies are really scrambling to look, you know, and develop more histone deacetylase inhibitors, and many of these may have side effects. So we know that beta hydroxybutyrate has little or no side effects that we know of, especially in regards to its epigenetic effects. But we do know from the early papers from Eric Verdin's group and the Buck Institute, the 2013 paper in Science, that showed that it was the first to show that it was functioning as a class 1 and class 2A histone deacetylase inhibitor that had impacts on enhancing our endogenous antioxidant capacity. So boosting our own cellular and physiological protection against oxidative stress, right? So our damage to our DNA is even kind of linked to oxidative stress in our bodies. And to know that we have an endogenous metabolite that's epigenetically enhancing our DNA expression of these enzymes and these endogenous protective mechanisms is pretty profound. And it's doing it through a gene pathway that's also under intense investigation, the FOXO3A pathway gene. So that's another, you know, gene target or target that may be amenable to pharmacological, you know, manipulation. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are looking at that. So that was in 2013, and then a number of publications were support this epigenetic effect of the ketone bodies. And a year ago, 2 papers came out that were of most interest, I think, and they were published in Cell Metabolism. And they showed the effects of a ketogenic diet.
One example. Oh, there you are. Hey, guys.
Hey.
We are back. No worries. No worries. That's all good. You got to love technology, you know? It's okay. Thankfully, I've done this on TV news before, and much worse has happened. So we're good. So I was just saying how this is a really, really exciting topic, because if, you know, not to oversimplify things, but if you can imagine, you know, something that we produce or have the ability to produce in our bodies, right, beta hydroxybutyrate, ketones, and their potential impact on disease through a variety of ways, potentially just impacting our own DNA. I mean, that's really profound and needs to be And I don't know if it's really talked about, outside of sort of the scientific world as much as it should be. Because, I mean, if you can imagine making an impact or potentially preventing something through cycling through with bouts of ketosis or whatnot, there's just a lot of possibilities, and obviously a lot more research needs to be done. But Dom, if you want to pick back up from where you left off, let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I'll keep it, real simple. I mean, we could get down into the weeds if we want, but there was 2 papers that.
No, we're all loving it. Everybody's commenting and they're loving it, so it's good.
So two papers were published in Cell Metabolism. That one paper was using a continuous ketogenic diet in a mouse model, and another was using a cyclic ketogenic diet or alternate week ketogenic diet. And they looked at a variety of markers that were associated with health and longevity and even tumor suppression. And they found that with a continuous ketogenic diet, that there was an extension of life with a diet that was somewhere around like 13%, which was pretty remarkable if you don't consider that it was not calorie restricted. And there was, the effects were mediated through epigenetic regulation of a number of genes, including P53 and DDTI4, I think, which regulates a number of things through acetylation, through beta hydroxybutyrate hyperacetylation that was influencing Mtor. So Mtor signaling pathway is a pathway that longevity researchers have put a lot of time and energy and focus into. And the fact that it was doing it through a metabolic independent mechanism, but it's altering a metabolic pathway through gene expression, was pretty remarkable. Another remarkable finding was that another paper was published right around the same time, that the ketogenic diet that was given an alternate weeks also didn't impact longevity per se as much as the ketogenic diet, but it did impact the health span. So things like had a neuroprotective effect, enhancement, or shall we say preservation of cognitive function with aging. So it was essentially, in an epigenetic way, it was suppressing the factors associated with aging. So, delaying age-related chronic diseases, basically. Wow. And so that's a pretty profound, finding that may or may not be, replicated in humans, but mammalian systems, there's a lot of overlap in the way, genes are regulated and physiological and metabolic function, right? So, but a mouse also has a very fast metabolism. Mm-hmm. So metabolic-based therapies like the ketogenic diet, various metabolic drugs, may have an effect in a mouse model that may be, not completely, reproducible in humans if they do the same intervention, just because a mouse's metabolic rate is 5 to 7 times higher. So if I was to fast for 24 hours, I'm 220 pounds, and a mouse would lose 20% of its body weight in just 24 hours. So that's observed like in the mouse models. For me, I would be 180 pounds by this time tomorrow if I fasted, right? So I would be 40 pounds. And so these types of interventions, whether it be carbohydrate restriction, intermittent fasting in animal models, really have profound effects that can give us, they are not always predictive, but they are very informative when it comes. So we cannot predict what's going to happen, but metabolic biomarkers, gene regulation, and a number of things like longevity, tumor suppression, neuroprotection are all going in the right direction. If they're going in the opposite direction, we might have some concern or look at the methodological considerations. Because I'd also like to say there's a lot of a high-fat diet can be ketogenic, and then you can have a high-fat diet that's non-ketogenic. Mm-hmm. Much of the research that's being published now that gives high-fat a bad reputation is a non-ketogenic high-fat diet. So
it's also high in sugar.
It's also
yes.
That does not produce ketosis.
Yeah.
So the big,
right.
The carbohydrates could even be restricted, right? Because you're to some extent, but it's not restricted to the level that actually produces nutritional ketosis define the ketogenic diet is defined very specifically by an elevation of beta hydroxybutyrate. It's that ketone body that needs to be elevated. And that is, you know, sort of the subject of the discussion today, the effects of on the DNA, the epigenetic regulation that's controlled by the ketone body. But when people, you know, hear about high-fat diets, you know, a mouse study or human study with a high-fat diet having negative effects on our health and longevity, they need to make the clear distinction between a high-fat ketogenic diet and a high-fat non-ketogenic diet. Very big difference.
Yeah, that's
physiology.
Totally. That's a really good point to make. I mean, there's even some studies in canines where, you know, they're trying to do seizure control with these dogs using a form of what, you know, was called the ketogenic diet, but unfortunately was not. And then you run into complications and issues when you have the presence of high fat, especially with something like a dog in the presence of high carbohydrates. I mean, you could deal with all sorts of things, pancreatitis, you're just over consuming food. So the structure of these protocols is so important. And that's why it's really important to have sort of conversations like this, as well as events like Metabolic Health Summit, so we can really bring in all the top researchers, clinicians, influencers, people in this space to have an accurate conversation about what truly is a ketogenic diet, what truly is metabolic therapy, and how it works. Because otherwise, you know, if we're looking at studies that involve more so something that's high protein, low carb, but not quite ketogenic, really, we don't know truly the benefits that the diet might have. But it's so exciting, even, you know, even in something like, you know, animal models, that this work is being done, and some of the results that we're finding, even though there is such a significant difference there, especially in metabolic rate, as you were mentioning with that great example, it still is very exciting that we're talking about this, and we're talking about how essentially, in some ways, what choices we make may impact the diseases we develop, or, you know, can potentially in some cases reverse. So, and that's one of the most fascinating things for me, as to what this can extend to. So, you know, we're going to be talking on Facebook live sessions every other week or so. The next one's July 20th, but we're going to be talking more about a variety of factors, a variety of diseases that this may in fact impact. So the next conversation is going to be on, we're going to somewhat cover type 2 diabetes, but more so type 1. I mean, there are people, including the amazing scientist that has been posting a variety of references as we've been talking, and he's going to be talking a little bit more about how he's really used a low-carb ketogenic approach to live to the fullest, even when dealing with something like type 1 diabetes, which is really, really interesting and exciting, that it extends beyond just, you know, overall health and longevity, and has potential there. Talk a little bit, you're involved, Dom, in a few really interesting organizations, not a few, a lot. And one of which, you know, really is creating a conversation about more of a rare disorder disease, Kabuki. Do you want to go into a little bit more depth about that and sort of its relevance in what we're talking about with gene expression?
Absolutely. I think one of the most profound kind of proof of concepts from a disease model standpoint and maybe a disease treatment standpoint, which we will be looking into, is the effects that were observed on Kabuki Syndrome, which is results from a genetic aberration of genes that actually manipulate or control the balance of gene expression, or de-expression. So, and that balance is tightly regulated by two genes that are defective in Kabuki syndrome, and there's no sort of treatment for this disease, and there's really nothing available currently that's remarkably effective at this time. So there was research that was done in 2014 on a histone deacetylase inhibitor, AR42. And AR42 is epigenetically can kind of activate this gene pathway, or it influences gene expression in a way that can silence the the neurological and the disease effects, the symptoms of the disease, and reverse some of the neurodegeneration in the area of the brain called the hippocampus, the dentate gyrus. More recently, and maybe from more exciting, is that they were able to recently do this in the Kabuki Syndrome mouse model without the histone deacetylase drug, but with the ketogenic diet, and they also mimic the effect of the ketogenic diet with exogenous ketones, which circumvented the gene defect and actually produced a hyperacetylation of a region of the gene that could allow expression of the gene and the proteins that would that actually were neuroprotective, and it silenced the gene, the disease effects, and actually rescued the neurons in the hippocampus. And
wow.
Remarkable effect that, once again, in a mouse model that is very informative. This particular mouse model is very informative because it recapitulates many of the effects that have been seen, in humans with the disease. So we are very interested in actually exploring the use of exogenous ketones that are in the form of a ketone ester or a ketone mineral salt, electrolyte salt combination, and using this in the mouse model of Kabuki's to determine if it has therapeutic efficacy. So we want to dose it so we know the optimal dose, the tolerability, and really getting down into the weeds and determining the mechanisms of these exogenous ketones and what exogenous ketone makes optimal in these preclinical studies to, as fast as possible, move this into human clinical trials. Something similar that we did was with a disease, Angelman Syndrome. So we worked with Dr. Ed Weaver, who is the leading expert in Angelman Syndrome, which is also is a disease that's caused by a persistent genetic defect that is treated, or the symptoms are silenced with a metabolic-based therapy like the nutritional ketosis. And in that study, we had an animal model of Angelman syndrome that responded remarkably well to a ketone ester that was formulated in with the diet. So it suppressed the seizures and improved motor function over time. And it also did it through changing the neuropharmacology of the brain. So it increased the expression of an enzyme that converted more glutamate, which in the context of a disease model can cause neurotoxicity, and made more GABA from the glutamate. So that was one of the findings. So
improved learning and memory too.
And improved learning and memory. So that's
oh wow,
finding.
That's huge.
It was neuroprotective in that it helped to restore learning and memory up to the wild type control. So essentially rescuing the disease phenotype and really having a profound neuroprotective effect. So that's with Kabuki syndrome. That's really the problem that you're dealing with. It just through the expression or the genetic defect is causing a loss of neurons in part of the brain that controls learning and memory. And there's a drug out there that may have some effects, and clinical trials are being done right now. And there's the ketogenic diet, which can work, and exogenous ketones. So maybe one or the other, or the two combined, is something that we're interested in studying. But we've already started the process, doing the paperwork to get the animal model here. We have recruited students in the lab that are enthusiastic to start this research. And most importantly, we've connected with an organization called All Things Kabuki. And later today, we will be doing a Facebook Live and answering questions about that parents of children who have Kabuki may have a lot of questions about the basic science research that's being done and the implications of this preclinical research for their child and for moving the science to human application into clinical trials. So we're very excited and interested in, now we're getting into a path that I never thought we would get into, is actually looking at the effects of ketones as epigenetic, regulators and the ability to work in a drug-like fashion. So we're very excited to start research and to work with the organization and the foundation. on this front.
That's great. Yeah, we'll post it, or we'll tag all things Kabuki in here so people will know where to go. What time is that live session going to be? Is it a little later today?
It's a little later today, so I'm coordinating
Okay.
with two medical doctors that just happen. It's a rare disease, but they just happen to be at the same institute here at University of South
Oh,
Florida,
wow.
the Moffitt Cancer Center, and I've I've met with them, and we're working together to start up the research. And they've connected with me with all things Kabuki, and they'll be coming over after work today within an hour, the next hour or two. I'll post it on my Facebook probably around 5 o'clock, I think 4:30 or 5 o'clock. So stay tuned for that.
That's great. I mean, it's really exciting when you hear about, obviously there are drugs that are being used for Kabuki syndrome, but the possibilities of something like a nutritional intervention and or exogenous ketones as being even just an option for people, much like in, say, epilepsy, where typically first line of defense is, an anticonvulsant, Keppra, phenobarbital, things along those lines, especially when it comes to adults. But if we could actually bring a conversation around the effects of the anticonvulsant or anti-seizure effects of ketones and their potential with seizures, I mean, doctors are using the ketogenic diet as a form of treatment, but it almost needs to be talked more about, because I know many adults who haven't even heard of it who are suffering from epilepsy. But the fact that there is this nutritional intervention, I know when I personally was working with brain cancer patients, specifically glioblastoma patients in a pilot study, we had some pretty powerful case studies. And just even being able to offer somebody something they can do, that they feel empowered, that they can, in the choices that they make every single day, possibly make a difference in their disease is a huge thing. And if we could use this metabolic therapy and it possibly might even make standard of care better, and improve some of those treatments, oh my gosh, like why not? It's non-toxic. Let's look into it more, and let's have more conversations about this. So we're all going to be talking more and more live on Facebook on the Metabolic Health Summit page. So make sure you guys are subscribed or follow this page, because you will receive notifications when we're going live next. As I mentioned before, July 20th is our next live date. We're going to be talking about type 1 diabetes alongside Andrew Kutnick, who's been posting some amazing references that all of you have to read after this live session. But we're going to be talking about some pretty cool things here in the near future, because Metabolic Health Summit, it's really about education at the end of the day. It's a scientific conference. It's 4 days in January, but really what we want to do is educate and start a conversation around this leading up to that event as well, and sort of give you a taste of what we're going to be covering at the event itself. We're going to be not only bringing in the top scientists and clinicians, but people who are actually doing it in the real world, and bridging that educational gap. And we have actually confirmed some new speakers. We should talk a little bit about that. We've got Andrew Kutnick, who's going to be talking, who just did a TED Talk. If you guys haven't watched it, I will post a link, YouTube link to his new TED Talk on type 1 diabetes and using a low carb approach. But we've also got Keto Connect. If you're not following them on Instagram or Facebook, they are amazing people and just real people in the world who tried keto, they tried everything under the sun, and now they're producing amazing recipes and just a really great voice, I think, for that layperson who wants to understand how they can use this in their real life. You want to talk a little bit about some of the other exciting guests and even keynote speaker that we have?
You want to go? Yeah. I mean, you guys have done all the work. You guys have been doing the recruiting.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're doing a lot of work too, Dom.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're really excited about the speakers. Recently, we have confirmed that Dr. Luke Cantley will be coming to speak, and he is an incredible cancer biologist. He studies cancer metabolism at Cornell, and he does really just incredible work.
An icon in the field of cancer metabolism. And
discovered the PI3 kinase pathway, which is in the science world a really big deal, and a big deal in general. And he continues to work with how we can target metabolic pathways in cancer to potentially slow tumor growth. And he's doing some really interesting work right now with the ketogenic diet as a adjuvant therapy to those PI3 kinase inhibitors that he has developed and studied in his lab. And who else do we have?
David Ludwig, who is really a pioneer in using the ketogenic diet for obesity, type 2 diabetes, body composition, appetite regulation. So a big benefit of the ketogenic diet, of having a brain that's running on ketones, is we believe the appetite, regulating properties, and it's a very effective tool for as a dietary approach for weight management. And he'll be talking about some of the metabolic effects, maybe the neuroendocrine effects and things like that associated with that. And we have influencers speaking, like Rob Wolf too is also confirmed speaker. We have
Dr. Nally, Adam Nally.
Yes.
He just came out with a book, actually, that does cover a variety of diseases associated with metabolic syndrome. And he is a doctor who's been implementing the ketogenic diet in his practice for years and can really speak to that real life application and what that looks like. So we're really lucky. We've got a lot of really, really, really great people from both sides of the spectrum that are going to come and share their information. And I do have to say a special thanks to Epigenetic Foundation. They're our presenting sponsor. Ketone Technologies up in here as well. Somebody I saw, maybe we'll open this up to a few questions. If you guys have questions, start posting them, because we do want to answer your questions, whether it's about keto, whether it's about what we talked today, and the potential impact that keto can have on DNA. I did see a question in here: can keto help a dog with epilepsy? And actually, Epigenetic Foundation is a nonprofit, and underneath that nonprofit is a program called Keto Pet that I'm personally a part of, and actually got involved in because my own dog suffered from a brain injury many years ago and started to develop grand mal seizures. So in my personal experience and in working with hundreds of dogs in this nutritional approach, the diet, very much so, much like it does with humans and epilepsy, specifically refractory epilepsy, can have some pretty powerful effects on dogs that are dealing with seizures. And actually, we've been able to get my dog completely off of Keppra, and she is seizure free. We control her seizures solely through the ketogenic diet. So check out ketopetsanctuary.com. There's a lot of great educational content there for those who have questions about dogs specifically and the ketogenic diet. So do we have any questions here? Let's open this up here. I know we had a lot. What about keto shifts, microbiota, which drive genetic expression? Hashtag gut brain project. We have a few different questions. You guys want to comment on that at all?
Yeah. we are studying that. Our human NASA project, the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operation, is actually collecting, fecal samples from the crew members. And at the time, right now, I was in a state of ketosis, so maybe we can look at the differences there. But this is being studied by us. I've been meeting with different people about studying the microbiome. And I'm most interested in how to do it most effectively and cost effectively too. So what we do know is that what we feed our bodies will impact greatly the diversity and the total microbiome that's in our bodies. And carbohydrate restriction, fasting, things like that work remarkably well at decreasing bacterial overgrowth that can be a big problem for a lot of people. So that seems to correct and help a lot of people. And then there's probiotics and there's prebiotics and things like that. And those things, fiber can actually, like in some people, make their gut problems worse. Generally speaking, I would say, as it pertains to the ketogenic diet, many people have reached out to me. There needs to be more human studies on this. Many people have reached out to me and said it's, quote unquote, fixed their gut issues. But we don't have data to support that. We don't even know what the optimal, microbiome is, and if that differs between different people, but it differs depending on your geographical location. We know when people are traveling, their microbiome is shifting depending on their immediate environment. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I could just say from my perspective, it tends to help a lot of people's gut health. And I link gut health is very intimately associated with inflammation in our body. So if you have a dysbiosis in the gut, the tight junctions that keep our endothelial cells together become loose, and then as they start to break apart, it lets things that would otherwise not get in, and it activates our immune system in a way that it kind of goes crazy. And markers like high sensitivity C-reactive protein start to go up. And I had a quick bout of bacterial gastroenteritis one time, and I was excited because I measured my HSCRP because I knew my gut health, is always really good on the ketogenic diet, but I had a short bout of food poisoning, and my C-reactive protein, which is usually 0.1 and super low, skyrocketed. But I was quickly restored within 24 hours almost. So I think that would otherwise not happen if I didn't go keto or didn't fast. So long story short, I think that there are some positive effects associated with the ketogenic. It's probably one of the more, one of the most questions that I get asked, but it needs to be studied.
Absolutely. And we'll be going into a little more depth rather on gut health. And, it's a really fascinating topic. And I know even on sort of from a keto pet perspective, just the number of dogs who are on high carbohydrate-based diet, which is the majority of unfortunately kibble products on the market, are very high in carbohydrates and sugar, and many of them come with all sorts of GI issues and inflammation and things along those lines. And what we've seen just from, these are case studies, individual people that put their dog on a ketogenic diet, but what we've seen has been pretty cool in terms of the complete transformation of sort of how their gut functions, or and just that then affects their skin and a variety of other things. It's pretty cool to see. And I will say, I actually just got some really interesting testing done myself. I'm totally a cholesterol nerd when it comes to the ketogenic diet and have done all kinds of testing. But in addition to that, C-reactive protein, and for me, I went from a 1, which is okay, to cutting that in half down to it was 0.3 to 0.4. So that in and of itself is, pretty cool and encouraging to, that we are doing something, especially anti-inflammatory. And you got to think about all the diseases and things that are associated with high levels of inflammation in the body. And that's really exciting to see some of those effects. So we'll be talking a lot more about that. Somebody asked about the myths about a ketogenic diet. There are probably a lot of them. We talked about one of them being, a lot of the research that is out there that says it's ketogenic is in fact just maybe low carb or high protein, but not enough fat to actually induce a state of ketosis or produce ketones. The other thing I would say, a lot of people get discouraged about keto flu, but it's fairly, or can be somewhat avoidable through supplementation, minerals, potassium, magnesium, increasing sodium levels, things along those lines. So there are some really, really great resources out there that you can kind of look at that sort of dispel all the myths. One being the Ketogenic Bible that we all really love as sort of a basic introduction to the ketogenic diet, as well as, it showcases some of the research. Would you guys have anything to say about that at all? On the myths about a ketogenic diet?
Well, I think, a ketogenic diet is defined very objectively by an elevation of blood ketones. So we know that protein above, say, 1.5 grams per kilogram is very anti-ketogenic, unless you're under dietary energy restriction or calorie restriction. So I think that's important to acknowledge. People need to measure their ketone levels. There are
good point.
Documentaries out there that I get asked a lot, about the magic pill was one of them, I think. And that was a really interesting documentary. But at the same time, I don't think it really focused on the fact that the ketogenic diet is a very strict metabolic therapy that needs to be done under medical supervision and very precise calculations of macronutrient ratios to guide a patient, for example, a pediatric patient with epilepsy, really needs to be guided with a knowledgeable registered dietitian who's keto savvy that really can do that. And I think, some people just will not respond well to the ketogenic diet. I think we have to admit that, if you follow the ketogenic diet and your C-reactive protein goes up, you may be a minority, but you may have a genetic, a SNP or something in your DNA that's actually preventing you from maybe acclimating to the diet. Maybe at first, you know, it is a stress for some people, but over time, if they stick to the diet and they're not seeing positive effects, I've had people email me many times that say, I'm following the diet and I just feel awful. And I feel, you know, things are not where I just tell them, well, get off the diet. Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
You know,
It's just like anything else. It's not for everybody, right?
Biomarkers are great, so you need to look at that, but you also need to realize like how you feel, you know, and there's a subpopulation of people out there, and this is a myth, like it's not a one size fits all. It's not a magic pill like for everybody. I think it can be amazingly, you know, therapeutic and I think it's a grossly underutilized metabolic therapy, but we also have to acknowledge that it may have some real side effects in some people. Kidney stones, perhaps, if you're not supplementing with things like potassium citrate or staying hydrated. And I think, you know, if the protein's not elevated to a certain level, the classical ketogenic diet can cause growth restriction in kids by not.
You're talking about like 90% of calories coming from fat, so super high. Right.
And it's, you know, it can knock down insulin and IGF-1, which makes it a great therapy for cancer. But we have to understand that the classical ketogenic diet, as we know it, implemented in kids, restricts various factors that are also, you know, necessary for their growth and their growth in their bones and their muscles and things like that. So these are, when parents kind of reach out to me, they get scared that their kids may not reach intellectual development and also their terminal height. But when it comes to, I use the ketogenic diet for its neuro-enhancing, neurobehavioral effects. So my energy levels more stable throughout the day and things like that. And I think from a medical standpoint, for kids, I think that's the real benefit there. I mean, if you have a child that's having seizures and they're on high doses of phenobarbital or other anti-seizure drugs, these cause profound developmental delays in the child that they may not reach their IQ that they could have otherwise, you know, reached. And the ketogenic diet may, you know, replace drugs, and that's a huge benefit. But the ketogenic diet may also, in and of itself, actually enhance learning and memory. I mean, there's so many publications out there that kind of show that. Of course, if they're not having seizures, that in and of itself, we know repeated seizures can cause even break free or, you know, neuroinflammation and things like that that could impair learning and memory. So there's many different reasons to use the ketogenic diet, but I think the science as we know it, especially peer-reviewed science, really supports the neuroprotective anti-seizure effects of the diet, and that has implications for many other neuro disorders too.
Yeah, I think another, you know, source of confusion that is associated with this whole area is the difference between nutritional ketosis and ketoacidosis, and that's something that, you know, is brought up a lot of times, especially by someone who maybe took a biochemistry class or, you know, is not familiar with ketosis or a ketogenic diet, but has some medical training, and just understanding the difference between those physiological states, and that nutritional ketosis is a very normal, you know, aspect, part of our physiology. Our ancestors went in and out of nutritional ketosis depending on what they were eating, what's in season, when they're able to eat, you know, fasting or starvation ketosis as well. So having ketones within a normal range in your blood, maybe up to something like 5 millimolar. If you have, you know, in starvation, perhaps it could get that high. But then ketoacidosis being a severe side effect of an abnormal physiology that's typically seen, especially in type 1 diabetics who don't have normal insulin signaling. And so insulin functions as kind of like a regulator of ketogenesis. And so when you are on a ketogenic diet and you have normal insulin signaling, insulin will be released and tone down your ketogenesis so that you don't make too many ketones and we don't affect blood pH. So for the vast majority of the time, a normal person, meaning normal not having especially, you know, type 1 diabetes, is not going to elevate their ketones to a level that is dangerous. So in nutritional ketosis, you're looking at maybe up to 5 millimolar. Ketoacidosis, that's something like 10 to 20 or even higher millimolar blood ketones. And it is something that, you know, can happen in very rare situations. A mild ketoacidosis can occur in otherwise healthy individuals, especially if maybe you're dehydrated, or I've seen some case reports in pregnant women as well. Seems to be a bit of a touchy situation and deserves some extra attention. But just understanding there's a big difference. And I've heard it, you know, explained as the difference between like a fire in a fireplace and a house fire. And it's really that completely different. Like nutritional ketosis versus ketoacidosis are completely different states. And it's important to recognize.
Yeah. It's a very well controlled, elegantly controlled, you know, metabolic state where you have an order of magnitude higher ketones with diabetic ketoacidosis. Right. And when I gave talks, people, and I would always point out, you know, in type 1 diabetes, that becomes the problem in the absence of insulin. So don't do low carb, don't do keto if you're type 1 diabetic, but I'd have to kind of bite my lip because at the same time, you know.
I was going to like, isn't there a great example in your lab?
Yeah. You know, so I either brush over the subject, or when people would ask me, I would like, yeah, you don't want to do this if you're type 1 diabetic, because I'm very conservative when I speak. But at the same time, you know, and there's a study, a Harvard study that came out with Dr. Ludwig, I think was David Ludwig was the PI, that really showed that a carbohydrate restricted diet that can produce and maintain nutritional ketosis may be the best option for many people. If the outcomes that you're looking at are, you know, glucose regulation, that you can have tighter glucose regulation. A more important outcome would actually be the use of insulin can be significantly reduced. So decreasing your dependence of insulin, of high dose insulin protocol. And I don't think any doctor should be able to argue that if you can maintain better glucose numbers while you're actually reducing your dependence or dosage of insulin, how can you argue that whatever that intervention is a bad thing if all the biomarkers are going in the right direction? So so that's why I think, you know, Andrew Kutnick's TED Talk is so remarkable, because you're using a ketogenic diet for something that medical doctors would basically cringe at and say you're crazy. But I mean, the data, you can't argue with the data, right? You can't argue with people who are literally adding years to their lives, because as he states in his TED Talk, you are predisposed to dying early of the 10 things that are going to kill you, whether that be cancer or heart disease or dying in an accident. All these things are dramatically, you know, your chances of dying are much higher if you're type 1 diabetic. You know, you can, people, you know, go hypoglycemic when they're driving in their cars all the time and have accidents.
Yeah.
So if you're hyperglycemic, if your glucose is you know, high, you're predisposed to getting cancer, different types of cancer and heart disease too. So
absolutely,
you know, the ketogenic diet is just one means to control that with an application that I really thought wouldn't actually make it mainstream, but I think it has the potential to. You know, it's nowhere there yet, but at least the science is supporting that. And
we're starting the studies being done.
Yeah, and the studies are being done.
Exciting.
Yep.
It is exciting, and there's also groups that are out there. Type 1 Grit is a great group of people who are actually using a similar approach to what Andrew's done, which is really, really exciting. So take a look at that if you're dealing with something like type 1 diabetes. And really, to your point on working with a professional, if you're using it for disease management, it is important, you know, whether it's seizure control or managing your diabetes, and say you are currently on insulin, you do want to be really careful with that, because as you get into ketosis, there is a shift that has to happen, whether it is with, you know, some sort of drug. So that's important to work with a medical doctor in that process, because it is much more complicated than just switching up your lifestyle. So it's really, really important to know that. But it can be a really awesome lifestyle. I know you, Dom, you were saying you do it for the cognitive benefits. It's exactly why I do it. I used to be addicted to carbohydrates. I, you know, was an athlete and was eating every hour. And now I'm actually that person that forgets to eat, which I never thought I would be that person. And my brain actually works better when I don't eat, surprisingly enough. So there are some really great effects. And I would say one of the biggest myths is that it's like a really difficult diet to follow. But for those of us who use it as maybe a lifestyle at a lower ketogenic ratio, maybe around 60 to 75% of calories coming from fat, whatever it takes for you to induce ketosis in your body. Everybody's different. But in that sort of setting, it can actually be a lot of fun. I mean, you get to have fat, bacon, avocado, you name it. I mean, and fat makes food taste good. And we sort of, not we, but, you know, people sort of took all that out of the food supply, and it was kind of replaced with sugar. So if we can bring in that fat or reduce sugar and potentially improve our metabolic health, why not? Why not give it a whirl? So just if you guys make sure if you have some sort of disease you're dealing with, work with your doctor. We're going to be talking about a lot more topics to come here soon. July 20th, we're going to talk about type 1 diabetes and type 2. So make sure you guys tune in right here at Metabolic Health Summit. Also, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. Andrew actually posted the link at the top of the comment section. And if he's still around, if he could post that again, that would be amazing. But make sure you guys head to that link or go onto our website, sign up for our newsletter, because you will be entered to win 2 tickets to Metabolic Health Summit, where we'll be covering a variety of topics. I mean, this extends to so many different things. Metabolic therapy and really food is a very powerful medicine. So this has been a lot of fun, guys. I'm excited to dive into more topics very soon. Is there anything else you guys want to say?
No, thank you so much for having us. I mean,
thanks for tuning in. We think it's good for us too to communicate, you know, on various topics, and I think more importantly to field the questions too that people have about this, because we get, you know, I get hundreds, if not thousands, of emails every day, and I can't handle them all. But I like learning from them. But I think it's good that this is a good platform for us to address some of the more important questions. I mean, every question's important. You know, there's no dumb question, but I think it's important to hit the questions that that many people have, you know, on this. And there are many questions related to this topic, because it's a new science, it's an emerging science, and it's also controversial, because there's like 2 camps. There's like, you know, you follow social media, the high carb, especially as it pertains to athletic performance, and then the low carb. And I'm kind of a centrist in there, you know. I mean, it has its applications, and we're working more towards, you know, understanding the truth. And I think that's what the conference is all about too. It's about really delving into the science, the clinical science, basic science, clinical application, and partnering with companies too that are making it a reality for people to actually implement this. So you know, compliance and implementation are the most important things, and doing it right is the most important thing when it comes to this diet. So
absolutely. So and I don't know. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that there's like right, wrong. I just think we all have to be sort of open to the latest information in nutrition science, the work that you guys are doing and other people around the world, and really have an honest conversation about what truly is working, and taking a look at sort of where we are as a country as a whole, at least in the US, and sort of the current state of health, and really have a serious conversation and just move the science forward, you know, cut to the stuff that's actually, you know, truth, that actually has evidence behind it. We really need to bring that information to the forefront and clear up a lot of misconceptions, and that's what we're going to do. Somebody asked if this is going to be on YouTube. Yes, it is. We're going to be posting this on YouTube at a later date, and we're going to be back here live. Make sure you guys go to metabolichealthsummit.com. You can check out all our speakers, and we're going to be posting some really great educational content here very soon. So thank you all for watching, and thank you guys. I know you guys are so busy in the lab and doing very important things, so I'm going to let you go, get back to your work, and we'll talk really soon.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys. Bye.
Bye.